EIN, baby, and every other day, too.
Daily Grand Lotto. Draws every Monday and Thursday. Buy tickets in store and online at olg.ca. This spring on Showcase.
My patriarchal ancestor, Lawrence Rutherford, founded our town.
I'm the creator of The Good Place and Parks and Recreation.
Nathan, I'm calling to request a response to Mayor Chisenhall's decision. Big Larry. I'm sorry, what?
This is the big time public prosecution about statute. It's about the safety issue.
I'm gonna get this town on my side. Yeah, there's something happening in that town. So much drama.
Rutherford Falls. New series Thursday, April 29th on Showcase. Also available on Stack TV.
Don't just know the story. Understand it. This is CFMJ Global News Radio 620.
This is Global News. I'm Toby Kerr. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland says the federal budget is a plan to bridge Canadians and Canadian businesses through the pandemic and towards recovery from the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. But the massive document also contains a number of measures designed to keep the minority Liberals in power, at least for now.
Chrystia Freeland says the government's top priority remains protecting Canadians' health and safety, particularly during the third aggressive wave of COVID-19 infections across most of the country. With that in mind, the budget proposes extending emergency measures, including the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, until September. Beyond the pandemic, the Liberals propose spending more than $100 billion to push economic recovery, including on a national daycare program. There are, of course, tax measures as well, including a digital tax and a luxury tax. The budget also proposes a federal minimum wage of $15 an hour. Terry Pedro, the Canadian Press, Ottawa.
BC and Manitoba are adjusting the age for those eligible for the COVID-19 AstraZeneca shot. That vaccine now available to those ages 40 and up. Ontario and Alberta recently announced a similar change, despite 2 people in Canada suffering ultra-rare blood clot-related complications after receiving the shot. The death of an influential Cree teacher due to COVID-19 has increased pressure on Saskatchewan's government to prioritize educators for vaccinations. Victor Thunderchild, who was 55, died in Prince Albert over the weekend. His brother Harvey says Victor's last tweet sent earlier this month was directed at Premier Scott Moe, calling for all teachers to be vaccinated.
I think he made a solid statement to Scott Moe to make sure that he looked at the essential workers, the educators, because I have kids. I have a daughter that's educated.
Scott Moe says his Saskatchewan government will be looking at priority groups for vaccinations in the coming days when the general age eligibility drops to people 40 and older. Rogers Communications says they have identified the roots of what caused the wireless service issues earlier today that have left some Rogers customers without access to cell phone calls and texting services. In a statement posted to its website from the company's chief technology officer, Rogers says they've learned that a recent Ericsson software update affected a piece of equipment in the central part of the wireless network, which led to intermittent congestion and service impacts for many customers across the country. A more recent update on Twitter says service has been restored to much of Canada, but they are working around the clock to restore full service to customers, which should happen in the coming hours. In the U.S., a medical examiner has revealed the cause of death for a police officer who died following the January siege on the U.S. Capitol building.
Medical examiner Dr. Francisco Diaz announced Monday Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick died of natural causes one day after a violent mob stormed the U.S. Capitol, saying it was a stroke that killed the 42-year-old. Sicknick collapsed January 6th and died in the hospital the following day.
Somebody hit him in the head with a fire
Capitol Police releasing a statement saying they accept the findings, but that it does not change the fact Officer Sicknick died in the line of duty, courageously defending Congress and the Capitol. Lionel Moise, ABC News.
In sports, the NHL's North Division has 2 matchups taking place right now. Ottawa Senators up on the Calgary Flames 2-1, just about to begin the We're in the NHL. Minnesota over Arizona 3-2. That's also early in the third period. At the end of the first, the San Jose Sharks up on the Vegas Golden Knights 1-0. Tampa Bay took out Carolina 3-2 in overtime, and the Florida Panthers over the Columbus Blue Jackets 4-2. Vancouver Canucks defenseman Alex Edler suspended 2 games for a knee-on-knee collision with the Maple Leafs Zach Hyman, and Zach Hyman out at least 2 weeks with an MCL sprain after that hit. From the Global News Desk, I'm Toby Kerr.
Real talk, common sense, Canadian. This is Charles Adler Tonight.
Here is Charles Adler.
Good evening, Canadians. I'm Charles Adler. It's another great night for Canadian common sense. It is, it's the biggest budget I've ever seen. But I want to throw the microphone over to our expert, our business specialist, Michael Campbell, who's the host of Money Talks on many of these radio stations every Saturday, and has been that way for decades now. And it'll be that way for decades to come. Michael Campbell, welcome back.
Thanks, Charles. And are you ever right? I mean, this budget would look like two phone books, and it can if you're talking about smaller cities in Canada. 739 pages. I mean,
even the mayor of Ottawa, Jim Watson, who's very friendly to governments, whether they're conservative or liberal, because of course he's the mayor of the nation's capital. He has to work with everyone. But even he today called this a war and peace budget.
I know. Well, I watched the pictures, of course, of Prime Minister Trudeau and our finance minister, and I was impressed they could both carry it in one arm. So there you go. But I mean, there's so many other measures of how big the government has become. We have 10,000 more federal employees. This is pre-pandemic up to April of last year. Since 2015, we're paying consultants, private sector consultants, about a 72% increase in the amount we're paying them, up to about just over $16 billion last year, again, compared to just 4 years earlier. So, a lot of different ways. I'm not surprised, I guess, because they touch on so many areas of our lives, and the pandemic has just juiced that a little bit further. But they show no signs that they want to back off of that at all. Not one bit.
So a couple of years ago, Bill Morneau's budget was coming in. I think he projected that it would come in somewhere in the 20s and ended up coming into the 30s. A lot of people thought that was a big deal. That was just a couple of years ago. And now we're talking about a deficit of nearly $400 billion. I mean, I just, has math changed? Has science changed? Has life changed? Do we not have to pay this back? You take your time on this, Michael, because I think the average person goes, wait a minute, 2 years ago, 30 billion was a lot of money. And now 400 billion is not necessarily a lot of money. There's a disconnect there.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that come into that. One is I think the numbers are so large that we're numb to them. I literally think that if that budget had come in, or the projections as we'd gone through this last year, and they'd been talking 250 billion or 300 billion or 150 billion, I don't think it would have made much difference to most Canadians because the numbers are not comprehensible. So that's one of the reasons. Secondly, what the government will tell you, and people who are not worried about the sustainability of a debt load that big, they'll say that, look, we've got record interest rates lows. And so the interest cost itself is, just as low or lower than it's been. Now, of course, the assumption made, though, Charles, is that, we're never paying this debt back. Let's be clear. We are never paying this debt back. So we're really only talking about how we're going to afford the interest costs on the debt. And yes, it has been financed this last year at record low interest rates. But they're making an assumption that 20 years from now, that'll be the same, or 10 years from now, or 5 years from now. I think that's a dangerous assumption. When I heard the finance minister say, you know what, this debt, didn't spend any more time on it than the statement, this is sustainable. Well, inherent in the statement, this is sustainable, are dozens and dozens and dozens of assumptions that start with what the interest rates will be. And of course, that's influenced by a variety of factors, including our perception of what inflation will be. But it's also about levels of economic growth. And our economic growth, of course, is going to get a boost from the U.S. recovering more quickly than we are. But it also assumes that for years to come. So there's just a lot in that. I've always been uncomfortable with how casual they've been, but they are not going to pay this back. We only look at the interest costs on the debt. And the challenge is a lot of the debt in the last year has been financed on the short term. And that means that interest rates were at record lows on the short term, but it also means that debt will mature coming up, say 3 years from now or 5 years from now. Well, we have to make projections about what those interest rates will be. But so far, the Bank of Canada...
Let's just do the math here. The interest rate on $30 billion is amounts to real money, right? If you're borrowing for $30 billion deficit. If you're borrowing for a $400 billion deficit, I understand you're not paying back the $400 billion, just the interest. I get that.
Yes.
But there's a large difference between what the total interest rate payments are on $30 billion and $400 billion. I know that sometimes people say, well, you can't compare this to a mortgage. You can't compare this to everyday life is different. But at some point, it's real money that adds up, and somebody's got to pay it.
Well, there's also another way of looking at it, though. I mean, along with what you're saying, one of the things I'd say definitively, there are consequences to it. But the consequence could be that the purchasing power of our dollar is severely eroded over time. That's what the debate is right now in all the economic circles. That's inflation. That's saying, oh, you know what? 3 years from now, 5 years from now, my dollar isn't going to buy the same amount. So yes, the Bank of Canada will be able to maintain interest rates at these lows, but what will be the implications of that? And one of the implications, as I say, is the biggest debate in finance today is, will that be inflationary? Will we get inflation past the next 6 months, which I think pretty much everyone agrees we will have inflationary pressures over the next 6 months. But what about 1 and 2 and 3 years out there? So one of the ways they can pay down this debt is with deeply discounted dollars, devalued dollars, I should say. And that's obviously that's happened in other jurisdictions in the world. But those are the kinds of things that are up for grab, and I think are not as certain as our politicians are suggesting they are.
Well, if you paid 25 cents for a chocolate bar 30 years ago, and now you're paying $2 for the same chocolate bar, I think everyone understands it means that the currency's depreciated. It just seems to me that if we're living in a period where deficits aren't being taken seriously, the currency will just go down, but at a much faster rate. Am I missing something?
It's always complicated, but you're on the right direction, absolutely. And I mean, in the same way, if you borrowed $1 million today, and let's just throw out some things. Let's say with that $1 million, you could buy a nice condo in Vancouver, or a nice house, in other parts of the country. But 10 years from now, that $1 million doesn't buy you that condo anymore. Doesn't buy you that house anymore. You're going to be paying back in those devalued dollars. The government benefits when we have inflation. It benefits that when inflation devalues the value or the purchasing power of the dollar. So they don't mind if they borrowed to buy that chocolate bar when chocolate bars are 25 cents, but they didn't have to pay it back to chocolate bars for $2 because it's not buying as much. So that's one of the big things. I mean, this is, as I say, the biggest debate in finance today, the biggest concern for the central bank, which is the reason we have record low rates. Without the Central Bank of Canada purchasing Government of Canada bonds, or in the States, the Federal Reserve purchasing, like you and I aren't buying government bonds for 30 years at 2%. We're saying, no thanks, I don't want that. We're not buying 10-year bonds going back in the summer at about 0.7%. We'd say, are you crazy? Because 10 years from now, when I get my money back, I won't be able to buy as much stuff. So we don't do it. So the Bank of Canada stepped in and said, I'll lend you the money at that rate. I'll create the cash, and I'll lend it to you at that number. And they have said they're going to continue doing that at least for another 2 years. I think there's a range. I mean, we've already had a pretty good jump in rates, over 200% jump in 5-year government bond rates, same with 10 years over the last several months. But I think they probably have a number where they say, we can't let the rate go higher, and we'll jump in again, and we'll keep those rates down.
Can we absolutely affirm for the listeners across Canada that it is this kind of thinking that makes the house far more expensive 10 years from now, makes the sink that you need for the house far more expensive 10 years from now, even makes the chocolate bar far more expensive? Is there a direct connection between this kind of government behavior and what we pay for?
Because again, you're pretending the central bank.
Well, again, we have to say, has the borrowing been justified? And through the pandemic, I think you'll have people saying, yes, it was. Although I would say I supported the government helping out businesses and individuals who were directly impacted by the pandemic. What I was uncomfortable with was the lack of targeting. We know now that people received as much as $20 for people who were not impacted by the pandemic financially. I'm saying we're all impacted socially, of course, and maybe our health, etc., but not financially impacted. To every dollar that went to people who were financially impacted. One of the results, one of the big variables, and why we now have record savings rates of $140 billion estimated for consumers, more, another 100 billion plus for businesses, is because so much of the money didn't go to, it went to people who were not directly impacted financially. So that's what they borrowed the money for. So that's the first thing. That is sort of a sustaining thing. When they go forward with this budget and say, we're going to borrow another $101 billion to boost the economy over 3 years, man, do I ever need details with that. But there is a casualness to this as I say, that I think it's too glib for the finance minister to simply say all of this is sustainable. It does represent, you asked earlier, this does represent clearly a shift in attitude about borrowing on the part of the government.
Even if you only have to pay the interest, that still adds up to real money. In a few moments, let's talk about some of the government programs, the program they want everyone to talk about naturally, because it works for them in the next campaign, especially to get votes from women and more working women, which is what they want to do to make sure they get a majority, is childcare, early learning. Let's discuss the affordability of that in a moment right here on Charles Adler tonight.
How Bell makes being at home better.
Hello, spring. I love this time of year. It's the perfect time for a fresh start, like switching to Pure Fiber Internet, the fastest internet technology and the best TV service in one awesome springtime bundle.
You have to have like a...
Amazing bundles are in full bloom. Get 5 150 Internet with 5 TV.
The perfect time to advertise. But all day.
5,500. Our Central America correspondent Will Grant told us that as well as Mexico, the youngsters are coming from places like Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador.
They're fleeing violence, they're fleeing environmental conditions, damaged crops, deep poverty, and even hunger. I was recently in Guatemala and was really struck just to the extent by which some families are eating once a day. Conditions are extremely poor. And I think there's been a lot of kind of mixed messaging or very poor understanding of the message coming from Washington. And what I mean by that is that a lot of people simply took it to be understood that when Joe Biden won the presidency, that they could make it in, that they could arrive with their children and say, we're here and, we're seeking asylum, and that would be acceptable. What they didn't necessarily expect was that the Biden administration has, in essence, extended the Trump administration's way of working in terms of putting pressure on Mexico to clamp down, putting pressure on Central American governments to clamp down on migrants as they head north. And so a lot of people are being detained in Mexico and are living in very perilous conditions in shelters or makeshift camps before they are deported.
Where are these children's parents?
Well, in half the cases, they are actually with them. So they've traveled with their parents, and those parents, like I say, perhaps traveling under the misconception that it would be simple to get in. Others have been sent on their own. And again, when I was in Guatemala recently, I spoke to the family of one young man who lost his life in the journey north. He was just 16, and his younger brother just 14, saying, well, in a year or two, I'm going to try myself. So there are young people who are going essentially with the blessing of their families, because what they will be able to send in terms of remittances is lavish compared to the salaries in the fields of Guatemala. So a lot of children are just making this journey. They're children in their teens. 16 is about the average age. So that is quite often the method that is used.
Will Grant in Mexico City talking to my colleague Valerie Sanderson.
Sending kids to
a
go
single
make money
day's
in
worth of
is
military spending, about $5.5 billion, could help stop.
That was incredible. White supremacy.
They're dead. Too, and moms, so they understand saving money on energy. That's why if you're an Ontario homeowner, your first and last call should be to LG Home Comfort for your heating, cooling, and water needs. So get a tankless water heater and save on that 20-minute shower, or flip on that air conditioner. Visit lghomecomfort.ca to learn more.
I have more than enough on my plate. Now with separating, I have to deal with lawyers, the legal system, dividing up our lives, our children's lives, and figuring out what my life is going to look like. Can someone help me through this?
And Russell Alexander Family Lawyers, your interests are our top priority.
I remember there was a very interesting scene happened in Haidi Lao, because they have very interesting services. When the person get into Haidi Lao, sometimes eats by himself or herself, the waitress would bring a huge stuffed animal, like a huge teddy bear, to sit across the table. And this person would ask, why do you do this? And I just feel like you seem to be a little bit lonely. I don't. I'm not. If you have dinner by yourself. And that's something they did before. Some people love this kind of idea. Some people feel like, oh, it's a little bit embarrassed. It seems like I'm very pathetic or something. But it's very humorous kind of way. It's interaction. I think human touch, human contact is necessary. For
That's
me, it's
not
very
human
necessary.
contact or human touch.
Michael Campbell is the host of Money Talk Show. Michael, I mean, the politics of childcare and early learning are easy. The women, especially working women, many of whom don't vote regularly, don't vote as predictably as women over the age of 55. The Liberals absolutely need them in order to secure a majority, and so the timing couldn't be better politically to roll out childcare and early learning. Question: can we afford it, or does this go under the same rubric as everything else? Well, we'll just borrow the money at low interest and hope that the interest rates don't change very much.
Well, a few things are very interesting. That, I mean, as been pointed out, this is a 28-year-old promise. So one of the things that is different, I think, is what you alluded to earlier, which is that our attitude about borrowing to do these kind of programs has shifted, or at least the government's attitude has. We're talking about, it's going to work out to what they said, about $6 billion every year for 5 years, and then they'll do a joint share with the provincial government. So again, we've become so numb to the numbers and say, well, that doesn't sound bad. I mean, we've got a deficit of $355 billion, so what's another 6? I think there is some of that, but also there's a compelling argument to be made that we'll get it back in terms of women entering the workforce or able to return to the workforce full time. What the pandemic revealed is that we do, with everybody you send home, obviously, it was even tough to work from home if you had childcare issues. That's the economic side. And I think you'd be hard-pressed to find any economist who did not support or say that that's a valid argument, that we will get an economic return from that, a direct one. What'll be interesting, Charles, to me, is I always love when these kind of programs become sort of, you grab the public's consciousness or become the part of the public narrative. And I wonder if we're going to consider any other aspects of this. There's the economic aspect, and I get that. But there's also, I'll give you an example, because as soon as I heard that, I was thinking back to Kevin Milligan, who's the University of British Columbia economist, and he did a study with Michael Baker at University of Toronto, and John Gruber, who was MIT. And it was published in 2008, and it was a big-time study with lots of response. And the bottom line then, they said the introduction of universal daycare in Quebec had actually led to a worsening of non-cognitive skills. A 2013 study out of Queen's University, published in Canadian Public Policy, confirmed those findings. So that's another aspect that I wonder if we'll even discuss other aspects besides just the economic driver of that policy. And I know Finance Minister Freeland is determined to put it through. And as I say, I think our changing attitudes about deficit spending, I think, assured that something's going to be done. Of course, 100% has got to be done with the provinces. I mean, that's what's killed it up to this point for 28 years, is that provinces have other spending priorities. And in this case, they may say, you know what, we got bigger problems in healthcare than we do in daycare. So I don't want to take our money and put it in daycare.
Demographically, there's more old people living longer, needing more dollars because of how much money gets ripped
But I
off
just
in
wonder if it's not
healthcare.
so much part of the narrative that we're
It's like
going
a fuck over kids for another 10 or 20 years.
Well, the
old fat white greedy
if provinces
white
down the
people.
road don't go along with this, I think the feds will shame them into it. They'll say to the voters in those provinces, the guys who are running your government don't care about your kids, and they don't care about women.
I'm with you. I mean, it will become, and I think you're dead on right. This was supposed to be the highlight of the budget. It's only, if you think about it, 155 billion in deficit spending this coming year, of which something like 68 billion is only earmarked for this. So it's a small percentage of the budget, but they're hoping it takes a large percentage of the attention. And I think they were rewarded for it. I watched tons of newscasts today, and this was always very prominent up in front with it. So I think they may have got their wish from a political standpoint, but it will be a political battle, because if I was in Saskatchewan, for example, and I felt I had bigger healthcare problems than I did daycare problems, I could easily throw that right back at the federal politicians and saying, you know what, we care much more about the health of our citizens than the federal government does. So it's a dangerous game. It's going to be interesting. As I say, they have not been able to reach an agreement for 28 years.
So Chrystia Freeland said that she's got to spend, the government's got to spend $100 billion to bring the economy back. But for the last few months, I've been hearing all kinds of bankers saying, not only is the economy coming back, it's coming back bigger than they thought it would.
And you are so right. It's funny. I was just reading from the Bank of Montreal, well-known analyst Douglas Porter. He with Michael Gregory said this: it is unwise to jumpstart an economy that doesn't need a further boost. Even the finance minister's own numbers today said they expect our economy to grow by 5.8% in the next year, in this fiscal year. That was April 1st to the next April 1st. 5.8%. That's kind of like the cumulative total of economic growth we got for about 3 or 4 years previous to the pandemic. I mean, we're talking a big, robust recovery that I think intuitively I agree with completely. I mean, who isn't dying to get out and get these restrictions out and go to a restaurant, go do a little travel, maybe go to a live sporting event, whatever it is. When I mentioned 140 billion in consumer savings right now sitting in the savings account, we got the money to spend. It's ready to go. And I think there's going to be a big debate whether that money needs to get spent. I think a lot of people are going to say, no, it doesn't.
Well, my training is you start to worry about inflation when the economy's revving at more than 3.5%. If you're revving at 5% and you're throwing in another $100 billion to jumpstart an economy that started, you're guaranteeing it. I think you're guaranteeing inflation. That'll be our conversation, no doubt, down the road. Michael, can
based on what? Based on what, though? Based on
Okay, I'll just say, read an Auditor General's report and tell me.
It's all common sense, End
up last or lost in Google searches. Instead, have Search Kings develop an online marketing strategy that'll generate real leads with transparent pricing and no contracts. Stop losing at Google Search Hide and Seek. You want to stand out where your customers are online? Switch to Search Kings.
April 28th is National Day of Mourning. It commemorates workers killed or injured on the job. Frontline workers have been our lifeline.
Auto commercial.
I am Conrad Vashon.
When I'm with you.
It expanded SICKLY. Frontline heroes put their lives on the line to keep us and our loved ones safe. They deserve to be safe at work and treated with respect. This message was brought to you by LaUna Local 3000.
680 news time, 11:26.
Now the business report, it's Richard Southern. Good evening. A major Rogers wireless outage not only irked customers, but experts say could impact the broader economy. Rogers wireless customers across the country reported a massive outage for both voice and data services. Users, particularly in Ontario and BC, said they were unable to place or receive cell phone calls or text messages for many hours. Rogers apologized for the outage on Twitter, saying, quote, "We sincerely apologize to our customers." Going on to say, quote, "We know connectivity is critical and we are working hard to restore services." This is so big that indeed it could well have major economic implications. In addition to, your personal communications, experts say the outage is impacting business sales and services like food delivery and curbside pickup and payments that require a wireless connection. Of course, the ability to work remotely also very much impacted. Rogers said its wireline internet services were not affected, have not been affected. Rogers stock hasn't been affected either. It closed.
That would be a monthly cell phone. Wireline. It doesn't mean the fucking landline telephone. That's not what wireline means. There's wireline, wireless, and wow. They're throwing out terms out there from fucking decades ago. So if you were a Rogers customer and paid monthly, you didn't get affected. Is that what you're trying to tell us? Because that's what those words would mean. That's everybody's fucking bullshit. Rogers is the worst. They got a swastika for a corporate logo, and nobody says anything about it. It's not a Mobius strip, and it's not coaxial cable.
By appointment only. See HondaOntario.com.
Alpine Credits. Do you own your home? You mean the condo I've been trapped in since forever? Yeah, I hear ya. Figure I should upgrade the home office. Approved. Maybe add a home theater. Approved. Home restaurant. Approved. Sure, but home football stadium, home concert stage, home bowling alley. Wow, you really miss going out. Home beach.
Alpine Credits, where homeowners
Hey, how
get
much money you
approved
making
to build
off
that
the
indoor
kitchen
beach,
table?
but that's an awful lot of sand. Alpine credits. Some conditions apply. This license 12616.
Some see challenges. We see opportunities. Some see doubt. We see hope. Some see limits. We see possibilities. At Amica Senior Lifestyles, it is possible to be safe, active, and connected, to experience a premium lifestyle tailored to you, to make plans and live life on your terms, safely, together. Find out how at amica.ca.
Hey, Gugu, what do you tell a teenager about cannabis?
Okay, I'm playing Haboot Canopy.
Up after the news on Discovery, the curious cases of Rutherford and Fry.
With her, Hannah Fry, and him, Adam Rutherford. We'll be answering your questions about everyday mysteries.
From the habitability of the planet Mars
to how many hams.
freekidscanada.org.
This is Global News. I'm Toby Carr. The federal government is promising billions in new spending on childcare. In their 2021 budget, the Liberals aim to eventually see an average of $10 per day across the country, outside of Quebec, which has its own system. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland admits it won't be easy.
This is not an effort that will deliver instant gratification. We are building something that, of necessity, must be constructed collaboratively and for the long term.
The proposal addresses calls from advocates and business groups to help thousands of mothers return to the labor force. BC is bringing in new orders to try and stem the spread of COVID-19. Premier John Horgan announced as of Friday new orders.
It's a very convenient time for them to want to encourage women back into the workforce. You double the number of people trying to get jobs, pushing down wages. As for this inflation, deflation thing, this idiot doesn't know what he's talking about. He's sold, when he was a kid, exchange rates were fixed from country to country. And most of these people don't know that that stopped one day. That's how out of touch they are.
The border telling travelers not to enter BC unless it's essential. Any British Columbians age 40 and over now also able to get the AstraZeneca vaccine. Manitoba also lowering its AstraZeneca age to 40.
What's
the U.S. Centers for Disease Control says the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine remains on pause as doctors investigate reports of dangerous side effects.
CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky says health officials are examining a handful of cases possibly involving adverse reactions to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine.
We are encouraged that it hasn't been an overwhelming number of cases, but we're looking and seeing what's come in.
At least 6 people suffered from rare blood clots out of the roughly 7 million Americans who've gotten the single-dose shot. A CDC advisory panel is set to meet Friday to recommend if the J&J pause should stay in place. Elizabeth Schulze, ABC News, Washington.
From the Global News Desk, I'm Toby Kerr.
Hello and welcome to the Curious Cases of Rutherford and Fry on Discovery for the BBC.
This is the program where you send us in the queries, questions and conundrums that you are curious about, and we will look into them on your behalf using the power of science.
So please do send us your questions, curious cases, at bbc.co.uk, and on with the show.
Childcare, learning, early learning, and childcare.
I'm Dr. Hannah Fry.
And you are going to send us your everyday mysteries.
And we are going to investigate them.
Using the power of
Science.
Science. I like it.
3, 2, 1. Main engine start. 0. And liftoff of the Atlas V with Curiosity. Seeking clues to the planetary puzzle about life on Mars.
Oh, shut up.
Today's case sent in
these guys get to start making those comments.
Because
so say 3, 2, 1, 0. That's it. Shut up.
Is much more expensive than $10 a day. So this would be subsidized by the rest of the country. My guess is it'll become like universal health care. It'll become a Canadian tradition and a Canadian value and a sacred cow. But at the moment, we want to discuss what it's all about. Before we launch into a discussion with someone who knows everything about childcare and early learning, and she's terrific at selling the idea, not from a money point of view, but from a child development point of view. Before we do all of that, let me just run a few seconds of the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, today on childcare.
This is not an effort that will deliver instant gratification. We are building something that, of necessity, must be constructed collaboratively and for the long term. But I have confidence in us. I have confidence that
must
we
be
are
constructed.
a country that believes in investing in our future, in our children, and in our young parents.
You're not going to have enough people
generation
trying to put their kids in
children and adults. There's a huge economic investment, and there's something remarkable about this. This is what we do.
Do you think this is something that's going to happen?
I think it'll happen within our lifetime.
Okay, well, I love your optimism there, Adam, because it's actually quite hard to get things to Mars, you know. Shall I give you a quick rundown of where humanity has got with Mars exploration so far?
Am I going to enjoy this?
Probably not, no. The Soviets were the first to build a spacecraft and attempt a flyby of Mars. But on the 10th of October 1960, the 1M number 1 failed to orbit. It was soon followed by the 1M number 2, which failed to orbit, and the 2MV4 number 1, which disintegrated in low Earth orbit. Then there was Mars 1, communications lost, 2MV3 number 1, which never left lower Earth orbit, then Mariner 3, where the payload failed to separate.
Okay, can I stop you? I think I'm getting the picture.
No, the next one works, Mariner 4, that was successful. Quickly followed by Zond 2.
Did you guess? Failed to orbit?
No, actually, communications lost.
All right, so I'm not going to let...
That sounds like they're stopping. Yeah.
Wait a minute, it was supposed to miss, but it didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, space is pretty big. That is literally a planet-sized error. Okay, I get this, fine. I see the game you're playing here. I think you're being a little bit obtuse. But here's the question then. Very specifically, how many things that humans have made that were intended to get to or near Mars have successfully got to or near Mars in the way that we intended?
21 times, and 8 operational.
Thank you. Out of how many?
58.
Oh, right. That isn't great odds. I accept that this is difficult, but it's not impossible, though.
Well, it is going to get a lot harder once you put humans into the equation as well.
Yes, I do realise that too, because, you know, clever people at NASA and the European Space Agency, they have been thinking about this for quite a long time. I spoke to Anita Sengupta. She was an engineer on the...
Does this childcare early learning system begin?
Well, typically it ends or it starts when parental leave ends for parents when they go back to work. That is, typically around 12 or 18 months, and that's when infant care starts and then moves into toddler care, into care for preschoolers, and then into school-age care. And so the kind of system that we're envisioning, that the federal government is talking about, and we're well on our way to moving toward in British Columbia, isn't for 0 to 12-year-olds. So we want to make sure that it covers licensed care, because, Charles, we knew we needed more childcare, more quality childcare before the pandemic. What we all know now is that it's completely essential to our economy and parents' participation in the workforce. So we're really talking about not the ad hoc siloed system that we have now, but actually building...
Flawed logic. Circular reasoning.
On the transit to Mars, we obviously are going to be on a spaceship, so we're not going to be protected from either of those sources of radiation. And then when we get to Mars, it's slightly lessened because Mars does have an atmosphere, but it's still too high for us to tolerate it as human beings without additional protection.
Yes, and I'm going to remember some of my school physics here. The best way to protect against radiation of any sort is to have shielding, and the problem with shielding on a spaceship is that it's heavy. Right?
Exactly. And then there's different energy contents associated with the radiation. So people have proposed using a water shield, for example, which will help protect you from the solar radiation, but it won't do much to protect you from the galactic cosmic rays. So that will require a different technology, which has yet to be developed.
Well, I told you it was
cosmic rays go through
hard, but not impossible. And don't forget that we have successfully sent extremely heavy objects to Mars in the past. Curiosity, which we worked on, that is a perfect example.
Yes, that's true. Curiosity was
one of the great.
Affordable. So you see that's why, you know, you've got the forest, you've got the mountain, and you've got low rental fees, and you know, housing is not expensive, and outdoor activities, outdoor adventures.
Nutritious food, all the kinds of developmentally appropriate activities that we would hope for, and then the parents would arrive at 4:35, 5:30 at the end of their working day to pick up their child. That's typically what it would look like.
I'm just thinking of a single mom who's making, say, $18 an hour. What you're talking about completely shuts her out. There's no way that she can afford that.
Well, not at the moment, no, and that's part of the problem. That's why there's an underground system of childcare, because it's completely unaffordable for, I've heard estimates of 75-85% of working families. And so that's why in BC we launched the $10 a day plan. It was started in April 2018 here with our provincial government. We launched the plan in 2011, so it's been some time in the making to get to this point. And now, it has resonated so much. It is so popular. Now we're seeing that the commitment is to 10 a day across Canada.
So if it's already available in BC at $10 an hour, I don't want to turn this into just a BC conversation because we've got a national mandate here. But let's take the people in BC who are paying $10 an hour. How does this federal plan change life for them?
Right, so there are people in British Columbia paying $10 a day. It's still a very small amount of people because it's still a fledgling program here. Okay. But it has laid the groundwork for the policy across the country. And so we saw Krista Freeland, and she made the point that she's a working mother herself and recognizes the importance of childcare. So we're seeing a commitment to cutting childcare fees by 50% in those places where people are paying full fees, not if they're already paying 10 a day, that's the goal. And then by 2026, 10 a day across the country. So pretty short timelines to do substantive work, but now with the political commitment and the dollars to back it up, it's very doable.
So Sharon, do you think that within 5 years from now there will be no waiting list, that anyone who wants access to childcare, early learning for $10 a day will get it?
This is a false narrative.
I don't think that's achievable. I think the programs that we do have now could move to 10 a day. Taking those in the not-for-profit and public sector, as they expand, they could be 10 a day sites. But we only have enough childcare right now, licensed childcare across the country for about 20% of children. So we've got a lot of expansion to do, not just creating affordability in the programs that we currently have, but expanding and making sure we invest in the workforce, the early childhood educators. Because if we don't, we're just creating spaces with nobody to work in them. So we have to really focus on the educators as well if we want quality.
So I don't have to tell you that many Canadians are choosing either not to have kids or they're having fewer kids. We're growing at a much slower rate than we were 10, 20, 30 years ago. And we're told by all the demographers that the only way that Canada will achieve a rate of growth for some of what we're talking about in terms of the childcare spaces we'll need in the future is if we bring in a lot of people from outside the country. Is that something that you're thinking about right now?
The birth rate's 1.6%. That has nothing to do with anything because they already bring in more than enough people to make up for that. Our population keeps growing would be the proof of that. We passed 38,040,000 like a month and a half ago.
Cost and unavailability of childcare
They're saying,
has really made them limit the size of their family to one child or two children. And so this is perhaps an opportunity for families to revisit that. But we also know that the size of Canada's workforce is shrinking relative to the size of the retired population. And so in order for the pensions and healthcare and other benefits retirees need to remain sustainable, we need young people in the workforce, and young parents need childcare if they want to participate in the workforce. So this is really...
If you have money, what does a young person being in the workforce have to do with it?
Well, that might be something for us to keep an eye on.
It's never occurred to me, but yeah, since it is a major cost, and no doubt costs are the major reason why people are not having as many kids. If it was less expensive to rear children, there's no doubt that many families would decide that more of them. We'll continue our conversation about childcare and early learning in a moment with Sharon Gregson, based in British Columbia.
We haven't talked about early. None of this has anything to do with early.
If I had a Corolla, I'd crank up the Apple CarPlay and do a girls' weekend. Maybe we'd stop by at that pottery shop again. I wonder if that cute guy Mark still works there.
Mom?
Oh.
And hellscapes, and I see opportunities.
Opportunities to instantly suffocate to death while choking on a dust storm. And then you freeze.
See, I'm definitely getting the sense that you are not on board with this mission.
You'd be right.
Where is your sense of adventure, though? Humankind's reach should exceed its grasp. We should be reaching for the stars ad astra per ardua.
Okay, you know what? You're right. I am being unnecessarily cynical. I think let's assume that this is possible.
Thank you. Now, despite the issues around landing and the atmosphere, there are bits of Mars that might be more habitable than others. So I asked Anita Sengupta, what would be the optimum landing site?
Hang on a second. You had the chance to talk to a real space rocket engineer, and you asked her where to park.
So you're going to get two different answers. One is going to be from the science perspective, and the other is going to be from the engineering perspective. I'm the engineer. The engineer obviously wants to select the location which is going to have the highest probability of success. So you probably want to have a smooth surface. You would want to be located below Mars sea level, so you've got more altitude margin. But from the science perspective, you want to go to the most interesting location, and that would be for the potential to find evidence of either past or current microbial life. So probably we'll do something in between. But ultimately, the goal will be to do a surface science mission. So you'd want to land in a place which has evidence of perhaps prior water flows and then maybe even subsurface aquifers.
And this is why Curiosity landed in the Gale crater, because it's thought to be one of the places with a good chance of having water, and that means the possibility of the conditions for microbial life.
And no parking fines. Okay, so
There's a train about 12.
The people across Ontario are getting vaccinated every day. Your turn is coming soon. Visit ontario.ca/COVID vaccine plan or call 1-888-999-6488 for assistance in 300 languages. Paid for by the Government of Ontario.
The new Global TV app now has the best news offering, including national and local news and 24 hours.
Stop it, I'm speaking in the book. Det var det skal vekstene. Åkermok, dum, kvarten av der søkkene. Der kører en diskutbar. Du går regulert, skækket ud i kihå. For det glas og spikkel det. Snak med nægge retten ind. Elsker der var kvart rundt. Ideri rundt om med let rundt. Alle sidste dyr for mig. Alle sidste dyr for mig. Kjemække den. Alle sidste dyr for mig. Jeg kræver mig for mig. Alle sidste dyr for mig. All is just the people, man. All is just the people, man. You messed it there, can't you to miss the road? No, all is just the people, man. Low rise.
I'ma get that spinach. I be spinning, I'm winning. They don't like it, yeah, I bet. I see the pain in their heart and their chest. Watch you said it, I'ma get that spinach. I be spinning, I'm winning. They don't like it, yeah, I bet. See the pain in their heart and their chest. I love the rain when it falls, yeah, I'm blessed. Took the fame and the cars and the jets. I had them thinking I was gone to the psych ward. I never left to live the life you would die for. I tell that oh I can't save her, I'm no lifeguard. Maybe you can get the G, but I might charge. Pull up to the spot, they're like, who is that there? Hands up, give me the loot like a cashier. What you thought, are you dumb? I don't play shit. I killed you and your brother with the same clip. All that bullshit you been talking, boys, ain't you? I'm a different man now, leave your faceless. Watch you said it, I'ma get that spinach. I be sinning, I'm winning. They don't like it, yeah, I bet. I see the pain in their heart and their chest. Watch you said it, I'ma get that spinach. I be sinning, I'm winning. They don't like it, yeah, I bet. I see the pain in their heart and their chest, yo. Versus spot, then I'm leaving unidentified. Just a rental, had to drop it off at Enterprise. Shell casings in the whip, had to check it twice. I think my OGs for that shit, they give good advice. Yeah, this about to be a genocide. These motherfuckers want me dead, but I can never die. I'm the reason why your wifey said she met a guy. 2 minutes in a pusher just to get inside. Yeah. We are not the same kind. You gotta pay dues, I already paid twice. Y'all don't make moves, all you do is waste time. I'ma always be woke while you haters stay live. Watch you said it, I'ma get that spinach. I be sinning, I'm winning. They don't like it, yeah, I bet. I see the pain in their heart and their chest. Watch you said it, I'ma get that spinach. I be sinning, I'm winning. They don't like it, yeah, I bet. I see the pain in their heart and their chest.
Welcome to Big Mom Matters, a podcast about Big Mom people, politics, land, and water. This week, more about Hollywood.
Niggas sleeping on me, wake up, I'm out of the casket. Fucking yellow board, on my neck look like an omelet. I'm like MJ, and these niggas that is vomit. Niggas still care, really doing all that content. I'ma hit his top, walk up, really rock it. I'm like MJ, and these niggas that is vomit. Niggas still care, really doing all that content. Do you wanna be my rival? My only competition is my idol. I'm killing them, these niggas suicidal. I live the double like busting guns and reading Bible. I push white, smoke green with a black brush. I'm getting fat, these niggas bitches give a fuck. I'm rocking niggas in my city, got a pretty drum. I'm shitting on the road, kicking up. That's my lifestyle, check girls, don't compare it. Ronnie, you will rock a man to sleep, don't get mad at me. I'm always speaking in the third person, cause there's 3 of me. One's a dope boy, a rapper, other.
Tell them that the squad's here. Give up on the plan, fam. Every year's our year. Top tier, toe tagging, coat magnum, boat banging, park running yard after summer saw the Volkswagen, no bragging. I'm the hottest hopper on the table still. Stock 80 mil, it never drops like a cable bill. Play the fill and dash while I jump a trillion hurdles, so we can't share tracks cause we run in different circles. Journals full of classics, livers full of greatness. Got so many bitches, I might give some to the neighbors. The realest in the business, all filled with imitators. Just the rawest fucking cars, bro. You dealing with the greatest. Hey, yo, fuck the hook, straight bars and still make it sound tight. Ain't about what a real one sound like. Cloud nine rappers hit them with a ground strike. On the one way, we giving them a round play. Well, there's a way, but don't get in the way of my will. Cause if you do, that's the day you get killed. That's the game that you drill. But the game is for real. Every bar's like a bullet in your brain will get spilled. And the chamber is filled to make the whack retire their appetite. Just make that shit rapid fire, this your last reminder. If you pass the wire, I blow up your flow shots. You a massive liar, not assassin tiger. With a duck, they killing. But wait, they suffer in a cupcake filling. Tie your ass up to the duct tape, sticking to your face, so your fake like some Subway chicken. Hey yo, fuck a hook.
Oh shit, we got like 2 minutes left of angry callers. I should check.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got some catching up to do, Charles, and today's announcement's really going to let us do that.
I've only got about a minute and a half here, but you talk about this magic laser fire. Can you please help?
I hate the way
help people understand.
Yeah, you already know who it is. It's your boy, Playboy Bandito, rocking my man Tycho here. Yeah, you already know who it is. It's your boy, Playboy Bandito, rocking my man Tycho here. Vintage. Yeah, you already know who it is.
I hate the way that they look at us. I hate the way that they said. I hate the way that they look at us. I hate the way that they glare. I hate the way that they look at us. I hate the way that they stare. I hate the way they look at us. I hate the way. I hate the way. Yo, I like to keep my shit tucked on the inside. These feelings they have always seemed to coincide. And as I went forward, they multiplied. Sometimes I even have to discuss suicide with these voices who used to be a guide. They used to help me, now there is hate implied. And the things I say and what they say makes me mortified. I can't help it, sometimes the sound is amplified. I have schizophrenia, that's a deal simplified. To speak on the issue, I am unqualified. But the people heard what I do and they replied with comments that made this shit have an upside. And those same comments made me feel satisfied. So here's mental health with my style applied. It isn't great and it shouldn't be glorified, but here it is 100% verified. I hate the way that they look at us. I hate the way that they said.
Yeah, you already know who. Yeah. It's that raw shit. I know some rappers in the game became thought quick, entertaining y'all while I'm hanging with convicts. Shit, you know that's a. You're gonna make it. You're gonna make it. You're gonna make it. You're gonna make it. Yeah, the Timberlake free yes. What up? Now I'm not good. My friend 2009. We're gonna make it. Yeah, they ain't stopping us, eh? Nah, they ain't stopping us. Nah. Check it. Yo, Dreamcast, let them know. I was born to grow up, abandoned and poor. Take medications that make me tired and also sore. I never asked for this, it just kinda came. Now I'm trying to make money, I'm after the fame. Kids blame me for everything that went bad. My dad was an alcoholic, he drank till he passed. I lived in constant doubt, I always had to shout to get my point across. I lived in about 100 different group homes. Never had the same bed for a month. I felt alone. They kept on changing my meds. They kept on changing my mood. My parents kicked me out when I was 12. It's nothing new. That's how I was raised. Went through all elementary school getting hazed. I met this girl. My friendship went terribly wrong. But that's just another reason for emotion in this song. Life is what you make it, through the thick and the thin.
I'm gonna let my truck, man.
trunk bang like I bust things. Let my nuts hang while I'm hustling. Ain't in the dope game, but I rap slang. Addicted like cocaine when I drop flames. Let the trunk bang like I bust things. Let my nuts hang while I'm hustling. Ain't in the dope game, but I rap slang. Addicted like cocaine when I drop flames. Keeping close to homemade. Got bars on me like my phone got paid. Drinking and driving, surfing all different ways. My mind stays stuck in the same ass. Maybe I should write this, or maybe I should write that. No, I'm trying to write this. You know what the only thing that I know when you hear this shit, you know when it says shit, I don't want to get my rock flag. I don't do that shit. I do
लिनन जो होते हैं ना, ये लिनन के कपड़े ये हैं भी महंगे भी होते हैं, बट डर्टी लिनन का मतलब होता है कि गंदे कपड़े जो होते हैं हमारे, उनको हम, और उसका मतलब यही होता है गॉसिप करना, एक दूसरे की बुराई करना, और हमें कोशिश करनी चाहिए।
This is 88.9 Surf FM. Toronto's
where's the other guy?
You are listening to 88.9 Surf FM, Toronto.
Look at that, he says Toronto at the end of it.
What your road? CA.
Yes, we see
Insightful.
when we see you.
Engaging and intelligent.
This is Global News. I'm Toby Kerr. The first federal budget in more than 2 years extends government support for workers and struggling businesses another few months as it aims to pull Canada through the pandemic. It includes $100 million in new spending over the next 3 years and brings Canada's debt over $1 trillion for the first time. The Conservatives were quick to criticize the Liberal government for not doing enough to shore up the economy, but Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland says the new budget puts us on course to create millions of jobs this year. The Liberals also plan to spend billions fighting climate change and are focused squarely on the private sector when it comes to reducing pollution.
$5 billion is going into a fund that pays for projects which help heavy industrial emitters cut back on greenhouse gas emissions. Promoting clean technology is a centerpiece of the Liberals' climate spending, as the government promises a green recovery from COVID-19. It plans to design a new tax incentive for the adoption of carbon capture and storage technology. One political scientist says the budget still doesn't answer how Western Canada is supposed to transition away from fossil fuels. Stephanie Taylor, The Canadian Press, Ottawa.
The COVID-19 vaccine versus variant battle is heating up. More provinces expanding access to the Oxford AstraZeneca shot. BC and Manitoba lowering the minimum age of eligibility to 40 from 55. A day after Ontario and Alberta said they're doing the same.
Only Chesterfield gives you this premium quality in both popular sizes. King size Chesterfield contains than any other king.
Multiple virus. That's the youngest COVID-related death in the province so far. BC also extending current COVID-19 restrictions on gatherings and indoor dining until the May long weekend, as well as implementing some new ones surrounding travel. As of Friday, all British Columbians will have to stay within their own health region except for essential travel, and the province will be starting random checks and roadblocks. The government will also be putting up signs along the Alberta border telling travelers not to come to BC unless it's essential. Rogers Wireless says calls, texts, and data services are returning to normal for customers after a massive outage starting early Monday morning. It says it could still take several more hours for all customers and regions to return to full service.
The lack of oxygen that killed Floyd.
The drug ingestion, right? The bad heart, the diseased heart, the hypertension.
Prosecutor Steve Slade, the jury, Chauvin had to have known what he was doing to Floyd.
He heard him, but he just didn't listen. He continued to push him down.
Fleischer also pointed out it's all on video.
That force for 9 minutes and 29 seconds that killed George Floyd. And he betrayed the badge.
Tape from Court TV. Chauvin showed little expression. He took off his mask as his attorney presented his closing statement. I'm Ed Donahue.
In sports, a couple of matchups in the NHL's All-Canadian Division. Ottawa over Calgary 4-2, thanks to a couple of goals from the red-hot Connor Brown.
He's just sending as much bad data as he possibly can at a time. This is ridiculous.
I'll say all about the beaches down there, how good the food is, all about.
Now topped 15 million, second only to the United States. The Russian Defense Ministry says Russian fighter jets intercepted U.S. and Norwegian patrol planes above the Barents Sea. The ministry says a MiG-13 jet responded on Monday when radar detected two jets approaching the Russian border over the Barents. The Russian crew identified the targets as a U.S. Navy patrol craft and a Norwegian patrol craft. The Russian Defense Ministry says the Russian fighter jet strictly complied with international rules for the use of airspace during the flight. Chinese firm DD Chuxing has signed a deal with Swedish carmaker Volvo to provide it with cars for its self-driving test fleet. Volvo will provide XC90 SUVs. The DD's autonomous driving technology unit will fit with its new self-driving hardware platform called DD Gemini. It says the built-in backup systems and safety features on Volvo's XC90 cars, combined with DD's self-driving system, will eventually allow the cars to operate without safety drivers in robotaxi services. And that's the news. I'm Shane Bickle.
Capturing images of people across China, exploring its evidence, and feeling the heartbeat of its villages, towns, and cities. This is Selfie. This is Selfie, giving you real-life stories in China.
Hello and welcome to Selfie. I'm Tony Reed. Today,
driving test fleet. Volvo will provide.
But he's very lucky. He's got a number of people following him who see him. Wonderful pieces of video. And Rex has an eye for the best. So he selects the best. And sometimes I got to tell you, they're tearjerkers, and that was what I saw today. Naturally, because of COVID-19, I'm thinking about the elderly people and their isolation and the people that they miss. And they generally, of course, miss their late spouses. That's what's most.
Some say Chinese is one of the most difficult languages in the world, and learning it is almost impossible.
The National Guard. The prosecutor, in closing arguments, said this was murder. The defense argued that Mr. Chauvin had correctly followed police training. Judge Peter Cahill issued final instructions to the jury.
Your verdict must be based solely on the evidence presented and the law that I give you. Your like or dislike of any witness, attorney, or party should not have an effect on the outcome of the case. The state of Minnesota and the defendant have a right to demand, and they do demand, that you will consider and weigh the evidence, apply the law, and reach a just verdict, regardless of what the consequences might be. You must be absolutely fair.
For once, the phrase eyes of the nation means eyes of the nation, indeed the world, looking at the verdict. Our correspondent Tara McKelvey has been covering the trial throughout. We spoke to her not long ago, and I asked her first off to sum up those closing statements.
The prosecutors said what they had been telling the jury all along is that they should really just look at the video, think about what they saw, and believe their own eyes. They should remember those harrowing moments when Derek Chauvin was pinning George Floyd to the ground, and how they felt that sense of helplessness and that very emotional experience of watching this video, and that's what they should take into the room when they're doing their deliberations. Now, the defense said, Eric Nelson said the jury should not be misled. They should be very careful not to be deceived by a fleeting image that they see there in the courtroom, and that they should take into account the larger context about what Derek Chauvin was experiencing in that moment and the decisions that he made at that time.
Right. So they're now away. They're sequestered. They've arrived with packed bags, and we're moving into the territory now of legal technicalities. we need a bit of help with the technicalities that everyone's going to be talking about, particularly what needs to be proved for it to be a case of manslaughter or a case of murder. What will they be looking?
November 23rd, our 7th Street. And then he pauses and he's having difficulty getting the words out because he...
Will the jury need to establish extent any other contributing factors led to Mr. Floyd's death? That could have included previous drug use or his own heart condition, a weak heart, and whether or not those were part of the reason that he died, or whether it was because Derek Chauvin had pinned him to the ground. It doesn't need to be that it was only Mr. Chauvin's use of force that caused Mr. Floyd to die. It could be that there were other factors involved in his death, but they need to consider that Mr. Chauvin's actions were a key part of that, and that would be a crucial component in determining a murder charge.
Right. The other thing, this idea of the hung jury, I mean, there's 12 jury members. If they can't come to a unanimous decision, what does that mean? Trial again or what?
Yeah, it means a mistrial. It means that they can't reach an agreement. All 12 people have to say they're on the same page. If they can't do that, it's a mistrial, and they have to start all over again.
Okay, now there's no ticking clock. They have as long to make their decision as they want. But one thing that the judge has said is that he wants to make the announcement, which is obviously going to be a crucial focus moment. I mean, the whole world is going to be watching. He wants that done during the day and not at night because of the fears of trouble. Tell us a little bit about what the atmosphere is like around the courtroom, because this isn't happening in a legal bubble. There's a lot of emotion on the streets. What does it feel like?
It's super tense. It looks like a ghost town. There is these military Humvees parked on the street. One former sheriff said it looked like a forward operating base in another land. And people are really on edge. I talked to this one guy, like the lone hot dog vendor in this empty shopping mall that keeps coming to work and no one's around to buy any hot dogs, but he's there. And he says it's like another 9/11. It's a sense of deep unease and anxiety as if you have no idea what's going to happen. And people are scared.
Tara McKelvey, BBC correspondent, covering the events in Minneapolis and waiting.
There's nobody there,
for
but they're all scared. What the fuck are you talking about? How are you reading the emotions of people that aren't there?
Someone you love. Girlfriend, boyfriend, husband, wife, it doesn't matter to me. Could be your mom, could be your dad, aunt, uncle.
Road. See anybody around it? Anything but what's in front of the car. How close are we to the flight? All right, now take it slow. Don't give any indication that you aren't doing exactly what they told you to. Remember, don't handle that box. Go to the string. All right.
First secretary in 2 different provinces before he was brought to Havana as Minister of Higher Education. And then he was put on the political bureau, and he became also a vice president in the government. And so he's gradually worked his way up through different institutions of the political system, and he's therefore regarded by the leadership as a very seasoned, experienced person. In public, he seems rather stiff and formal. He doesn't really have a lot of personal charisma. But in a small group, I'm told, I haven't met him myself, but people who have met him say that he's very personable, very open, and that he